Hi, this is Chris Shelton, the Critical Thinker at Large here, and I am today collaborating with Lloyd Evans, who I have done previous video work with on my channel. He is a former member of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and like me, is an advocate now very publicly against that organization in the same way that I speak out against Scientology, because both groups are abusive, destructive cults that engage in human rights violations and worse as a normal part of their activities. It is not the thing I want to stress about this, and of course any of my regular viewers will know, it's not an unusual thing when Scientology or when the Jehovah's Witnesses are violating somebody's human rights. That's a regular part of the practice of what those organizations do. And that's why we speak out against them. And this last week, I'll throw, during the course of this, I'm going to throw up some screenshots and probably some clips from this particular video, but what prompted me to contact Lloyd and reach out and do this collaboration was the Jehovah's Witnesses had a convention recently where they produced a professional quality video showing their membership how to shun family members. And specifically, the video shows a couple of parents who are shunning their daughter, which means literally kicking her out of the house because the church organization disfellowshipped her, which in Scientology parlance is disconnecting somebody or kicking them out, right? Declaring them suppressive. Same thing. And but Scientology hasn't gone so far as to create a video telling people how to do it. And this was a pretty bold move on the part of the Jehovah's Witness organization and the elders and whatnot. So I wanted to talk to Lloyd about this because this is kind of a big deal. And so, hey Lloyd, thanks for coming on here.
Thanks for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be back on your channel.
Yes, excellent. I love your work. I love what you do. And I think
Likewise.
we're on the same path, so.
Yeah.
So first off, could you, since probably the majority of my viewers and viewership who tend to be Scientology watchers are not going to know a whole lot about, the Jehovah's Witnesses and their activities and whatnot. First off, just, there was a convention. What was this convention about? Who's this black guy on the stage talking? What is all of this, about? And then what makes this particular recent convention, which you're hashtagging worst convention ever, why is this the worst convention ever? So,
okay. Well, just a little bit of background on conventions, because this is not a one-off convention. So the video you've seen of the black speaker on the stage is just one of literally thousands of conventions that are going on all over the world, not just this month, not just last month, but right through until I think the early months of 2017. I could be wrong, but it's certainly something that at the very least is going on throughout the summer. It's worldwide, and all 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses, plus whatever friends and relatives they can persuade to come, all 8 million of them are expected to attend. So when a Jehovah's Witness goes to a convention, it's a 3-day deal. They turn up, or they're expected to turn up on the Friday, sit through a day of sessions, then they do the same thing on the Saturday and the same thing on the Sunday. So the video you've seen is literally just one of thousands of conventions. And the reason I'm calling this the worst convention ever is because they've just recently started to introduce videos to try and enhance the manipulative powers of what the speakers are saying. And, this is the first time I have seen such overtly manipulative videos being shown at the conventions, because I can remember going to conventions as a believing Jehovah's Witness and sitting through talks that were telling us to shun our family members who were disfellowshipped. It's one thing to have a speaker on a platform saying that. It's another thing entirely, as you say, to be shown a high production dramatization of how it should be done. and one that is specifically designed to pull on the heartstrings and emotionally coerce people to do it.
Exactly, and it's interesting. This is probably analogous, maybe in the Scientology world, to their 8 or 9 international events that they do every year, right? On commemorative specific dates. You know, the anniversary of Dianetics and the anniversary of this and the anniversary of that. They have these special events. But of course, the only speaker now in Scientology events is David Miscavige. It used to be like, I guess, the JWs, where you have a variety of speakers. Used to be that way in Scientology events, but now it's just the one-man show of Miscavige.
And also Jehovah's Witness conventions. I mean, the one I used to go to in Manchester in the UK, that was typically about 12, 13,000 attendees. You'd struggle to find many more Scientologists than that on the planet.
Yeah, exactly. The membership differences are substantial. Yeah, substantial. They would be lucky to be getting, 3,000-4,000 people coming to one of these Scientology events.
David Miscavige would drool at the opportunity to speak in front of an audience that size without having it photoshopped.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Now, in this particular convention, I noticed in one of the write-ups that you did, and I think important to this, to the point of what we're going to be talking about here, is that this convention seems very focused. They had this key word, loyalty, right, and being loyal, and usually. The conventions that they hold, the subject matters goes here, goes there, but this one seems very focused. Why do you think that was?
I think because, I mean, Scientology at the moment, I'm not an expert on it like you are, but I am interested in it. It's kind of like a little side hobby of mine. And, Scientology is really under scrutiny at the moment. And I think that there is almost an uprising against the harm that's being caused by fundamentalism in any form. And Scientology is really under scrutiny as a result of that. And I think there's a similar effect taking place now with Jehovah's Witnesses. So what's happened is the internet, as with Scientology, the internet is now a completely toxic environment if you are a Jehovah's Witness who wants to hold on to your indoctrination. Literally, all you need to do is go on Google and type in Jehovah's Witnesses, and you will be bombarded with information that completely debunks, Watchtower teachings. And the way the organization is responding to this is not to become more mainstream, not to soften down on its policies and become less cult-like. It's actually kind of closing ranks and acting like a caged animal and actually becoming more cult-like in response. So this convention series, as you point out, is titled Remain Loyal to Jehovah. And the entire 3-day event, all of the talks are geared towards telling witnesses, you have to stay loyal. You have to stay with us no matter what happens. If one of your family members leaves, it's hard on them. You've got to shun them. And the shunning videos are just one element. There are other videos as well. I don't know whether you've seen the bunker videos.
Tell me.
Well, I'm now just finishing my own rebuttal to the shunning videos. My next rebuttal will be to the bunker videos. They actually reenact a group of witnesses in the basement of a building, and it's supposed to be during the Great Tribulation, which is the build-up to Armageddon. So it's supposed to be a future depiction of literally the last few days before God destroys the earth, the world as we know it. And again, and this is why, again, I'm calling it the worst convention ever, because it's one thing to talk about Armageddon and talk about the Great Tribulation and talk about literally 7 billion people being slaughtered by God for the crime of not being Jehovah's Witnesses. It's another thing entirely to actually have dramatizations depicting, the moments just before all that happens. So,
wow.
Astonishing. Yeah.
Wow. And So they're really going to a very fear-based
Yeah,
drive now.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And fear works. Fear always works. It's happening in America with, I don't want to offend any Donald Trump supporters. It's probably all they could do with being offended, but it's exactly the same mechanism there. If you can get people terrified of something, you'll get their support.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is. I agree that that is how Donald Trump is conducting his campaign, and yeah, on my podcast, we haven't had enough dirty words to throw at that guy because of that. Now, also, I think that what we're looking at here with this, in both camps, and it's very interesting watching this happen in the Scientology world, but then seeing this happening, different but the same in, another destructive cult like the Jehovah's Witnesses, which again, much larger, substantially larger group. But the same phenomena, the circling the wagons, and the effort to separate the wheat from the chaff, the sort of
Mm.
you're either with us or you're against us, and
Yeah.
those things are coming out now more than I think ever before. I think these guys had a fairly comfy existence before the internet.
Yeah.
Because it was pretty easy to control the flow of information.
Well, Scientology, like the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, was built for the 20th century.
Right.
It simply wasn't built for an age in which information can be shared freely and in which you don't have a monopoly on information. And what we're seeing at the moment is both cults really, really struggling to keep their heads above water now that everybody has free access, not just to information that is critical of the religion, but also fairly damning evidence against the leadership itself. And just as with Scientology, you guys have had Ron Miscovich's book, and you've also had Going Clear with very direct, damning exposés of the leadership. It's starting to get like that with Jehovah's Witnesses as well. We recently had, in fact, only last year, we had the Australian Royal Commission, where for the first time in living memory, we had a governing body member on being asked questions at a Royal Commission. And he was really grilled by the guys there and forced into saying things that any witness watching it would think that is unrecognizable from my religion. This guy is completely misrepresenting what we believe purely because he's being put on the spot and because he knows that if he says the truth, it will make him look like a monster. So both Scientology and Watchtower are really struggling, I think, in the internet age and in this age where, just calling yourself a religion doesn't mean that you get a free pass on everything anymore.
Exactly. And I think that is a direct outgrowth of the proliferation of information and the ease of its access, via the internet, Now it's interesting. I'm wondering in the JW camp, with this video coming out and with this guy speaking the way that he was, in Scientology land, they have ethics officers, who are literally people whose job it is to enforce the ethical codes of Scientology, meaning all the various rules and whatnot, and the most important being, really in a nutshell, remain loyal to the group, right? Whereas if you speak out, or if you're connected with people who are speaking out, or you're connected to people who, they call it, when you're criticizing, complaining, or fault finding, they call it nattering.
Right.
If you're nattering, right? And I was curious, it's lately from the communications I receive from those still in or who've recently come out, they are really stepping up the enforcement internally. And I'm thinking that what we're seeing right now with the JWs is a similar tightening up. Do you see that sort of thing?
Yes, in terms of the governing body, the problem that you have is that you have the governing body who live in a little bit like with David Miscavige, they live in a very kind of sheltered environment where they're not really in touch with reality. But
To
the
say the
local
least.
the local enforcers or the local ethics officers are pretty much ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses, in a local town or a local city, but who have, managed to rise to the position of elder. And you'll have maybe, I don't know, a dozen or half a dozen elders in each congregation, and their job is to enforce the rules that come down from Watchtower. And the interesting thing is that we have seen a few changes recently. Well, the most obvious changes have been to do with finance, where they've basically stripped congregations of their financial autonomy and made it so that more money is sent to Watchtower.
Really?
Yes, congregations are now completely dependent on Watchtower if they want to have, say, a new Kingdom Hall, or they want to have maintenance done. So they're losing autonomy. And these are changes that are being literally read out to them at meetings by the elders. And the interesting thing is that in one of these bunker videos, actually, was it in the bunker video? It was in one of the videos that's shown at this convention. They reenact an elder. It was in the bunker video, sorry. They reenact an elder reading a letter as though it's a new letter from the organization. And they literally show these two witnesses sat in the hall, as you would say, nattering to each other and complaining as the letter is being read out. And the whole point is, oh, well, they didn't make it because they were disloyal. If only they'd have just gone along with these changes, they would have made it through into the new world. And the amazing thing is that the finale to these videos, the finale to all the videos, I'm not joking here, it's actually a dramatization of the paradise. So what you have is all of the characters from all of the videos that are shown throughout the 3-day convention, including Sonia, who is the girl who is shunned in the shunning video. She appears in the paradise. And so it shows all of these characters from all of the videos walking along the beach, or walking through the woods, or walking through the fields, because they've been loyal and they've finally made it into this new system. What it doesn't show is that actually, according to Jehovah's Witness beliefs, in order for this paradise to exist, 7 billion people have had to be massacred, including innocent men, women, and children whose only crime is to not be Jehovah's Witnesses, and they will be buried underneath the lawn. They will be buried underneath that forest somewhere. It's not a utopia, it's a dystopia, because you have to spend the rest of eternity praising the maniac who's made this happen. So
yeah, exactly.
That's the real kind of cringeworthy cult finale that you probably haven't seen to all of these videos. And I'm doing 6 rebuttal videos. I'm literally now I've just finished the first one. The 6th one will be my response to the Paradise video, just to wrap it all up. But they really are crazy.
Wow.
They're going full on cult.
Wow, that is really sad. And it is interesting how, for somebody like you or me, or, others, like I was saying, I was watching some other response videos and whatnot by other ex-members, how obvious the authoritarian controls and the thought policing are becoming now. With Scientology as well, and how it's not, the words they use are loyalty to Jehovah, but then when you listen to this man speak on stage, it's all about to Jehovah's organization, right? And
well, the two are almost the same thing. I mean, if
right.
you're a Jehovah's Witness watching that, whenever he's saying loyalty to Jehovah, in your mind, you're not even consciously doing it. You're just thinking, well, that means I need to be loyal to Watchtower. The two terms, I mean, that there must have been a time in the organization's history where they had to actually explain what the relationship was between Watchtower and Jehovah, and how it actually came about that Jehovah chose his organization, and how it received its mandate to effectively rule on behalf of the God of the Bible. There is actually a story behind that. There is doctrine that explains that. But I think if you were to actually take an ordinary witness to one side and ask them to explain what that doctrine is, most of them wouldn't be able to explain it, because they've just been raised to think of the organization and Jehovah to be more or less the same thing.
Exactly, and and that has certainly developed in Scientology as well, where loyalty to Scientology or staying faithful to Scientology or whatever includes following without question anything David Miscavige says.
Yeah, I was going to say, because obviously Scientology doesn't really have a god. The god is really the leader, isn't it?
That's right. It is a cult of personality.
Yeah.
And
Amazing.
It's L. Ron Hubbard, and all this work has been done to convince Scientologists that L. Ron Hubbard personally passed the mantle to David Miscavige, which of course never happened. Nothing even remotely like that happened.
No.
And when you find
he was
out,
kind of a runner for L. Ron Hubbard, wasn't he? He was kind of quite
at first he was, yeah. But he very forcefully grabbed the reins of power.
Yeah.
And Hubbard was going, literally going crazy. So it was, the whole picture that's painted it has nothing to do with reality, Now
Amazing.
I wanted to comment also, this shunning thing. When people in the Jehovah's Witnesses are shunned or are disfellowshipped, that means there is no contact between that shunned individual and members of the church now who are in good standing. Is that right?
Yes, it is now the case, thanks to the latest convention, when it actually shows the girl ringing her parents and they actually refuse to pick up the phone. Again, very graphic stuff. I'm sure that's how most Jehovah's Witnesses were already interpreting the shunning laws, but now there's no dispute. That's how it should be for everybody.
Right.
There was kind of a loophole called necessary contact, and that was for, let's say, my dad's shunning me. Let's say one of my uncles, who's a Jehovah's Witness, dies. My dad would be able to ring me and say, your uncle's died, the funeral will be on this day, will you be coming? That kind of thing. That would be called necessary contact. But I think even that now, especially with this latest shunning talk, people will really be thinking whether they would be breaching what Watchtower wants them to do if they were to call for any reason. And we also had a Watchtower magazine go out in 2013, which basically told witnesses that they're not even to email those who are disfellowshipped or disassociated. So literally every conceivable way that you could think of where there could be just some slight trickle of contact has just been blocked off. So it's literally nothing now.
And it's kind of creepy and scary how in the course of the video the girl is narrating this. The parents aren't. The girl is, right? Because she, clearly from the tone of how she's talking during the video, she's come to some point of realization where she's returned to the light, right? And she's talking about this period
how
where her
terrible
parents,
she was.
Yeah, where her parents have shunned her, and they show her reaching out through the phone, and the mom almost picks it up, right? And the girl is saying, this is so twisted, because the girl is saying, and it was so good you didn't pick up that phone because that's just that little bit of contact could have been enough for me, and I might not have gone back to Jehovah if you hadn't. It's like this really sick interpretation of tough love.
In my video, which hopefully it will be up in the next few hours, but I actually show a second convention where they show the same video, and because it's a different speaker, his talk is very slightly different to the one you saw. It's actually all based on the same outline, and I actually show the outline, and you can see they are literally reading word for word what the governing body wants them to say in parts, but every now and then they deviate. And this other speaker deviates by saying, "Wasn't it brilliant how the parents didn't even pick up the phone?" That's what he chose to say, in deviating from the script. But I think what really stood out for me with the video was the blame the victim routine, because Really, the victims in this whole scenario are the girl Sonia and her parents who are deprived of her contact. And the villain is Watchtower for imposing this rule where they're not allowed to talk to each other. Instead, the girl is cast as the villain, her parents are cast as her victims, and everything is about how upset they are, nothing really to do with how upset she is and how she's suffering from it all. And that for me was one of the most unrealistic things, because in my own situation, obviously my dad is shunning me now, but I reached a stage with him where I knew I was going to be leaving the organisation, and I had a very brief window to plead with him not to shun me. And when I tried sitting down with him and explaining to him, well, listen, I'm leaving, and it's actually because it's none of it's true, Dad, and let me show you why. He could not handle that conversation, and he could not get out of the room quick enough. He made his excuses. He said, I'm feeling nauseous. I need to go to bed. If he really believed that what he had was the truth and he loved me, you would think he would be saying, bring it on. Bring on your very worst arguments against what I believe, because I know I have the truth and I know I can convince you. That scenario between me and my dad was nowhere represented in that shunning video. Instead, you have this obstinate, disrespectful girl who, frankly, you would be happy to see the back of when she's having that exchange. Her arms are folded. She looks mean. She looks nasty. That is not what apostates are like. That is not what most disfellowshipped people are like. They just want to have contact with their family, and they're quite happy for their family to believe in whatever they want, so long as they can just have normal contact. But, you know, as we've been saying, Jehovah's Witnesses are conditioned to deny themselves that contact.
Exactly, and of course it's exactly the same with Scientology. They have to cast the apostate, the person, you know, leaving.
The suppressive person.
That's right, as a suppressive person. They have to make them the bad guy. And they will do whatever, they will go to whatever means they have to, including blatantly lying about the person, to anyone who will listen within Scientology, to convince them that this person is the rotten apple and it has nothing to do with anything that or the organization ever did that was ever wrong. They're never wrong about anything. And it's fascinating to me, getting some time and distance from it, to see how illogical it is, the practice of it, because all it does is create enemies for the organization. There's no live and let live. And if there was a live and let live, these destructive cults wouldn't really even be called destructive cults, you know, because we wouldn't feel that way about them. But
did you, as a Scientologist, did you have a problem with the disconnection policy, or was it only after you left that you thought, oh, that's wrong?
See, that's the thing. I actually didn't, because I was convinced. I mean, and here's the thing, actually, early on I didn't, right? For most of my time in Scientology, I didn't. Near the end, about the last 5 years or so, I started seeing it for what it was. But up until that point, I went along with the idea that every single person who was declared a suppressive person was declared with cause. They did something, or some things. You know, it wasn't just one or two things. And the way the Church of Scientology does it, or used to do it, they don't do this anymore, is they would actually write an issue on yellow paper, goldenrod paper. That's why they call it goldenrod. And they would list out the things the person did. Wow. So, and they post these things on notice boards around the organizations. And so you would see this, read this, and go, oh, this guy went off the rails, right? He committed adultery on his wife. He abused his kids.
That's really nasty.
Yeah, that's how they would do it.
Yeah.
Right? And they'd list all the crimes that are in the Scientology justice codes that the person had violated. And so you would be convinced this guy brought it on himself. You know, and you'd be like, well, of course I wouldn't do that. And my friends and my loyal family and all of this would never do those things. And it's only when it starts coming closer to home more and more people were being declared suppressive, and the issues weren't even being put out anymore. Suddenly they were just declared, and you're like, what, where, how, why? What, and suddenly you had to go and knock on the door of the ethics officer and say, why is Joe Blow declared? I don't understand. Oh, well, come sit down over here, and they'd pull the file out, and they'd pull out this issue and read
Oh,
this.
wow.
You'd be like, oh
Wow.
my God. And then they'd take it back. No, you can't keep this, right? Put it back in the file, go lock it up. And so suddenly things were very secret. And it got really weird, and that's what started turning on my alarm bells. I was like, no, this is not, because you saw the folder, and it was,
Mm,
it was pretty thick, and you're like,
yeah.
who are all these people who are being declared, right? So you start getting suspicious that maybe something else is rotten in Denmark here. And and of course, the other thing about this, another noteworthy thing about this practice in general, is that it really doesn't stand up to logic, because it violates the very principles upon which these organizations and these religions say they are built.
Yeah. Oh,
Right?
we're a pro-family organization. Oh, are
Right.
you?
That's right. Exactly. Or we're all, communication in Scientology.
Yeah.
Communication is the universal solvent. It dissolves all things. It solves everything. And then, well, wait a minute, but I can't communicate with this guy, so
Yeah.
we're never going to sort this out.
Yeah.
And the justice, tumbrils roll, and they're like, well, we tried to communicate with them, and they, it's all on them. They wouldn't communicate, and this sort of thing. And you're like, this isn't really working out for me, and it just gets more and more obvious how it is a kind of totalitarian control system.
Well, you see, with me personally, I can still remember what it was like when I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I had kind of uh, like a subconscious list of things that kind of irritated me about the organization and things that didn't make sense to me about the teachings. I'll be completely honest, shunning was not on that list, or at least I can't remember it being on the list. I can even, actually, if I try hard enough, I can even remember situations where I thought, hang on, that family have got disfellowshipped relatives, and yet I know for a fact they're having them round to their house every now and then. That shouldn't be happening.
Hmm.
And I didn't make a deal about it, but it kind of played on my conscience, because I thought, should I be making a deal about it? Should that be happening? But that's what it's like when you're in a cult. It's what you are led to believe, that that's how it should be,
That's
and that if you don't support it, there's something wrong with you, and actually you should probably be shunned if you don't support it. So that's why it's so, I mean, I don't think people understand who haven't been in cults. I'm sure you experience this as well. When you try speaking to someone who's never been in a cult and you try explaining this to them, they just look at you funny, and you think, well, why can't these people understand that that behavior is not acceptable? There must be something, they must be a bit simple, or they must be a bit stupid. And that's one of the problems I think all ex-cult activists have, is trying to get people in that situation to relate and understand that it is actually possible for an organization to be in control of your mind, so that you are
exactly.
doing things that do not make sense and run entirely contrary to your human nature.
That's exactly right. And it has nothing to do, and this is almost a mantra with me now because I have to say it so many times.
Mm,
It has nothing to do with how intelligent you are.
yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, these people are not morons. They are not idiots. That's not what it is. And there's
Yeah,
this like knee-jerk, they're all just a bunch of morons, and you just go, dude, you're not getting it.
yeah.
You're not
If
getting
anybody can be lied to, no
it.
matter how intelligent they are, if the circumstances are right, especially if they're in a situation of emotional vulnerability. I mean, the witnesses made their way into my family, but they first made landfall in the Evans family when my grandmother, she just recently lost her two parents. So you can imagine how distraught she was. And
Yep.
then she has these people turn up on her doorstep saying, well, guess what? We'll see our relatives again. in the new system, all you need to do is, pledge allegiance to this organization. Well, they obviously didn't say that, but you can understand why someone in that situation would just go for it.
Absolutely, exactly. They're very emotionally vulnerable.
Mm.
And one last thing I wanted to ask you about on this is it seems to me that this video leak, this information coming out, the same kind of leaks and information are coming out of Scientology like a sieve. It seems to me that more and more people within these organizations are staying in or staying connected, but are giving people like you and me the goods.
Yeah.
I get emails, I get things all the time, and I was wondering if that's the case with you guys too.
Well, that's what happens when you have a captive organization. When you create this cage, there are going to be people inside. Most of the people inside the cage don't know they're in a cage, but there's always bound to be a small number of people who do actually know they're in a cage and do know that if they get out of the cage, there will be huge consequences. And the only thing they can do is try and help those who are outside the cage. And that's where the leaks are coming from. With the convention material, we now have literally all of the transcripts that were sent from the governing body for the speakers to read from the platform. That's why, like I said, I'm overlaying the transcript so you can see how they're following what the governing body wants them to say. And we only have those transcripts because there is a circuit overseer. He's like, I mentioned elders before. When you have a group of congregations and you have someone in charge of that group of congregations, he's called a circuit overseer. And we have an awakened circuit overseer on the inside who's sending us this information. But it's, like I say, inevitable when you have a captive organization.
That's right, exactly. Well, this has been very interesting. I think that I'm curious, actually, before I say anything else, what do you think now? You're, the Jehovah's Witnesses. It is millions of members. They're not lying when they say we have millions of members.
Oh, that really is, yeah.
Yeah, lots and lots of people. What do you think this is going now? With this kind of overt circling the wagons type of mentality that the elders are now putting out. Clearly, they are afraid, and they are, So what do you think? What's your prediction on this? What do you think this is going to go?
Well, I obviously don't know much about Scientology, but with Watchtower, I do actually firmly believe that the organization has financial problems because what they have this organization that's been inherited from the 20th century when it was all about expansion and expanding around the world and opening up branch offices around the world and printing loads of stuff. And as we both know, printing is expensive. And what we've been seeing over the past 5 to 10 years is a downsizing, and they're trying to actually shrink the organization to make it more cost effective. They're closing down branches, they're laying off staff.
So there's active downsizing.
Yeah, there's measurable downsizing.
Okay.
If you go to a Jehovah's Witness on the street and you'll see their magazines, and you pick up the magazines, they're now wafer thin because they've actually reduced the number of pages so that they're cheaper to print. Usually at conventions, since we're talking about conventions, usually you would expect to receive a new book and a new brochure or something like that. At these latest conventions, they're not giving out anything. It's just download our videos. So there's measurable downsizing going on, and I strongly believe. Oh, and also recently they were literally begging for money on their monthly broadcast episodes. That was a few months ago now. So I think with Watchtower, it's a case of serious financial difficulties, and I think this Remain Loyal to Jehovah convention is in part a response to that.
Okay, got it. So, yeah, unfortunately, Scientology is not suffering from a lack of money.
No.
But it's so tiny, and it's losing members so fast. I call it the world's fastest shrinking religion.
It's a little bit like a mafia, isn't it? So long as it's got a certain number of members, it can kind of keep trundling on, can't it? I suppose.
Yeah. The estimates are, between liquid funds, slush funds, and then real estate value and property values, we're looking at about $3 billion worth
Yeah.
of stuff, you know, and that's not a tiny amount of money. And I've said David Miscavige doesn't need to worry about one new member coming in. He's set for the rest of his life. He just needs to kind
Yeah.
of keep the train rolling down the tracks, you know. But
Do you think there's any possibility of the IRS revoking the tax exemption? No.
I really wish, you know,
Mm,
and if they did it tomorrow, there'd be nobody jumping up and down higher than me.
mm,
But I don't think the IRS is motivated to. You know, they were lied to. It's easily documentable. In my book, I document how they
yeah.
were lied to.
Yeah.
But you know, in order to push that political train down the tracks, it takes a lot of political capital.
Yeah.
And you know, like it or not, Scientology has influence in Washington and behind closed doors. They just have demonstrated that they do.
Yeah.
So, so it'd be nice, you know, and I think if more and enough pressure were brought to bear, the government would investigate and do something about that. The FBI has certainly investigated them,
Yeah.
but I don't think that pressure exists yet, even despite Alex Gibney's best efforts and the work all of us are doing on it. So,
So we've got more work ahead. Brilliant.
exactly. That's right. Well, listen, hey, thanks for taking my call here and doing this. I appreciate trading some notes here and talking about this stuff. And I keep an eye on you guys just like you keep an eye on us. So
Yeah.
so good
It's an
deal.
absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
Absolutely. All right. Talk to you soon.